Our next speaker is well known to the Lyme community as a forceful advocate, spending countless hours supporting those suffering from Lyme and tick-borne illness. She has developed a national reputation for her focus on prevention, education, patients, legislative advocacy, and her work in support of tick-borne disease research. Please welcome Jill Auerbach.
So good morning, and thank you so much for asking me here to speak with you today. Again, I'm just going to ask a favor, and that's to hold your questions to the end. This is a summary of where we've been for 44 years now. Patients suffer with no test to determine active disease, while ticks and disease increase spread, infecting us. Scourge of disease will continue to increase unless the source of disease in the environment is addressed. So I will be addressing this. Ira will be addressing this. There we go. The problem has grown just beyond one disease, and other fatal, hemorrhagic, and encephalopathic and other ticks are bound to reach our shores. A Lyme vaccine is merely a patch and not a solution for the environment or for us. Until the tick population is reduced and tickability is blocked from being able to transmit pathogens, the scourge of Lyme and other tick-borne diseases will continue to march across the USA, infecting us, co-infecting, reinfecting us, our children, our pets, and the animal reservoirs in nature. This is a summary of most of the what is available or being considered today. No one thing is a silver bullet, and they must be used together. That's called IPM, Integrated Pest Management. None of these have been done in any area large enough to be able to measure their effect on disease. Current research is delivering viable options for which we must investigate. These are just some of them, and they're very exciting. We need our researchers to have the money to bring them to fruition. Here are just some items that are currently available. And notice spray only delivered about a 60% effectiveness rate and knockdown, whereas a high-pressure spray used by researchers in the field who know what they're doing have received 95 to 100% effectiveness kill rate. And it's unfortunate that many operators don't know that. And so if they come and spray your yard with just a backpack, it's not pressured enough. And these are many of the things that require to be completed. Very exciting research. In fact, Dr. Osvald at the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Study is doing the natural fungus, and on the other page, the tick meat box. The anti-tick research that would have stopped disease cold in its tracks by preventing ticks from remaining attached, thus their ability to transmit disease, transmit pathogens, is no longer NIH funded. It might also reduce tick populations. So we have to understand the environmental problem. Here are some of our critters. Notice the mouse, the chipmunk, and the mouse shrew, and the shrew are the animals most responsible for spreading disease. Well, notice that the deer is not, but the deer is responsible for the increasing numbers of ticks. And deer populations have increased from just about 100 in about 1900 to now they're well over 1 million. So what we have is an environmental tick problem, and I hope these gross you out. Tick research holds the most potential to bring about fruitful solutions, and I'll pause here so you can read that. Therefore, I organized TREAD, which is comprised of about 40 prestigious scientists who all support the critical importance of tick research and call for it to become a priority. In fact, Dr. Thangamany is a member, Dr. Thangamany. Tick Research to Eliminate Disease, a scientist coalition, TREAD, provides a strong voice when speaking with federal and state legislators about the long-neglected field of science that can prevent a worldwide catastrophe. Right now, personal and property prevention is all we have in our bag of tricks to protect ourselves. It would logically seem that our government has been at fault for not addressing this. So these are going to shock you, I think. So the latest year we have for data is 2017. And the estimated cost burden in the United States that year was just under $5 million. Billions. Seems like it should only be $1 million. Well, between 1990 and 2017, it was over $72 billion. And what about New York State? Using the New York State numbers, not the CDC numbers, and we'll get to that next. Lyme disease and the cost burden, societal cost burden and actual cost was over $1 billion. Kind of shocking when you see what it has been spent on research. So New York State had such an expense to our local health departments trying to check up on every single case. So what they decided was the most endemic counties, they used the statistical sampling to decide how much Lyme disease, and then they uplifted it to 100%, and they did that for 3 years in a row to make sure it was accurate. But the CDC is not allowed to use those numbers. They can only use the actual surveillance case numbers. So what has happened is, like this current report, it's about 50% of the real numbers, and every year there are more counties that are endemic and less accuracy in our numbers. And the sad thing is that it's not New York State alone that has a terrible problem with surveillance case numbers. And as a member of the Health and Human Services Tick-Borne Disease Subcommittee, part of it was surveillance, we discussed this, and it's really a huge problem. So chronic illness, kind of shocking. It's 86% of our healthcare dollars. The survey, the NIH survey, and human research studies demonstrates that Lyme patients are included as chronically ill. This NIH funding chart shows that while Lyme cases are higher than those of other diseases and numbers increased, the funding was not commensurate with this. Again, like the NIH, while Lyme numbers went up, funding did not. The United States must develop a proactive, forward-looking approach in response to the increasing problem. Serious worldwide threats abound, and some are certain to reach our shores. The Asian invasive H. longicornis tick should have been a wake-up call, and I think it has been. And if you want to ask me about that later, I can tell you about it. That, along with news about other serious worldwide pathogens such as Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever and tick-borne encephalitis, etc., and the many other tick species which are all threats on our horizon. When a 3-year-old child has 32 ticks attached to her, 32 nymphal ticks attached to her after going to one of our local parks, you know it's way past time to do something about the ticks. Children ages 5 to 9 are most at risk. I look forward to the day when children can jump in the grass, roll in the grass, jump in the leaves, as I once was able to do. They should not get sick by merely going out to play. Thank you very much. I was going to pick up with this portion of this.
Good morning. We'll go to the next one. I'm wearing it as well. When we see that chart, when we see those words, we think of the battle between us and the IDSA and CDC. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the real politics. First, at the federal level, you see 3 names up there. Chris Smith, who's been in Congress since 1983, has been trying to get Lyme legislation passed to help us for over 25 years. He has been minimally positive work. He's done a lot of good work, but has not been able to get to Congress. Along came a gentleman by the name of Chris Gibson, who at the time in 2011 happened to be Jill and my congressman, and 2 people from Lyme Action Network. Chris is here somewhere, Chris Fisk. Holly had to go back to do something up in the Albany area. Went to see him to explain to him just what a problem this was for his constituents. Well, to put it mildly, Chris picked up the gauntlet. He's a very impressive gentleman. He was an Army Colonel, Ranger, 82nd Airborne, PhD from Cornell, and taught at West Point. He then introduced legislation, and I will give you my opinion that Chris was picked by the Republican Party as a potential presidential candidate for 2020, back then, not now. He's retired. He's teaching at Williams College. But as a result, when he introduced the legislation, which we all worked with him on, it got passed in the House of Representatives. But you need the House and the Senate did nothing. So it died. Next time around, in his 3rd term, which was his final term, he announced at the beginning of the year that he was going to retire at the end of the term. He again got it passed in the House. But this time, President Obama wanted this thing called the 21st Century Cures Act, and the Senate picked it up. They picked it up and gutted it. And we found that out the Thanksgiving weekend. We spent 2 days, a lot of us from New York, New Jersey, California, and Virginia, on the phone. And the 3rd gentleman there is a gentleman by the name of Kevin McCarthy. Some of you may know his name, some may not. He is currently the minority leader in the House, At the time, because the Republicans controlled the House, he was the majority leader. What most people did not know, but is now public knowledge, so I can say it, was we knew that Kevin McCarthy had a child with chronic Lyme. Turns out he had two. We didn't know that both had chronic Lyme. We went through Chris Smith to Kevin McCarthy, who made it very clear to the parties involved that they would fix the legislation. And in 48 hours, as we boarded an airplane coming home from Florida, we watched the vote where it was fixed. And eventually, in December, President Obama signed it, and we got the 21st Century Cures Act. This is the act that Jill was talking about. I'll let you read this. It is forms a working group in Congress, 3 2-year terms. They wasted the first year, and then as a result, people who got onto it, like Jill, worked 16-hour days in a period of 3 months, 7 days a week to get it done. It was submitted to Congress and to the Secretary of HHS, and now we're waiting for them to announce who's going to be the second group. A lot of people in the first group are not going to do it again. It's just too much. And the report went to Congress late last year. These were the subcommittees. One of the good things you can think of, if you look at this website, you can go look at the whole report. You can look at the subcommittee reports. It'll take you about 3 years to read. It's hundreds of pages. Testing and diagnostics, we got agreement among all parties. Even though the CDC today will still say the 2-tier test is the way to go, all parties agreed the test was no good, including the representative of the CDC. So what about New York State? Little different story in New York State. This actually happened earlier. Dee Barrett is still in the Assembly, as is Richard Godfrey. They were our allies. Dee at the time, originally, before redistricting, was our Assembly person. When we went to her, she was no longer our Assembly person, but she was a very supportive person. And on the Senate side, we were basically blocked by the Republican Senate. Again, that potential presidential candidate went to the senators in New York State and said, "You guys are wrong, and I'm putting out a press release at 5 o'clock this afternoon." That next morning, Saturday morning, Kemp Hannon convened the task force in New York State, and they brought out legislation, which is the law we have today, which protected doctors and patients. They're protected by giving patients a choice, because the way things were going, all the doctors who treated, like Dr. Ligno, who will be speaking later, were ready to close up shop because they were being harassed by the Office of Professional Medical Conduct, which is the licensing enforcement part of the Department of Health. Since then, Senator Torino, who you also saw on that chart, came into office. She became chair. Bill and I are co-chairs of her advisory board. Right now, the Senate is back to being Democratic, and no one knows what's happening to that task force, and Sue is just proceeding as if she was still in charge of the task force. So she's introduced additional legislation. There was a New York State tick-borne disease working group announced by the governor last year. He did that saying how important a problem it was. Guess how much funding he put in his budget? Zero. Okay. The Assembly and the Senate passed a law requiring a New York State tick-borne disease working group. And Jill and I were on the phone with the gentleman in the Department of Health Wednesday, I think we talked to Brian. The bottom line, he's waiting for all the appropriate people to announce who they're going to be on the task group. And they haven't done that yet, so it just sits there. This is not the first thing in New York State where the legislature passed it, the governor signed it, and they never did anything to actually implement it. So we'll keep pushing on that. Noah made a mess for us. Questions for Jill or I? Oh yes, this year's budget. I did forget to mention it. The Senate, as I said before, is now Democratic. Sue, we worked a couple of days in Albany as well, was able to get the Senate Democrats to agree and put $1 million in the budget as she had gotten passed the year before for Lyme disease. A little bit about New York State politics in general. How do you get a budget in New York State? Well, it doesn't matter what all those people do. The governor, the head of the Assembly, and the head of the Senate sit down. And I can tell you there are senators, Democratic senators, who were outraged that that $1 million got taken out. But it did. And no one had a vote, no one had a say. All they could do if they wanted to, which many of them were afraid to, was vote the budget down. So they voted for it. In fact, tonight, we're on our way from here to Buffalo, and we will be sitting at a table with 2 New York State senators, one a Republican, one a Democrat, who have been supporters. In fact, Senator Kennedy, the Democrat, has introduced an insurance bill. And I actually met with his chief of staff about a month ago to advise him why that was a very risky thing. Because Dr. Liebner will not take insurance, not because he's a bad guy, it's because the insurance companies won't take him. So you get doctors and a law that says you can treat, and the doctor says, oh good, I can treat now, and I'm going to start treating my patients with what they need. And the insurance companies say, well, sorry, we don't want you anymore. So we got to fix that part of the problem, and there are laws on the agenda to try and address that. Okay, thank you, Jill. Any questions?
So last week, the CDC, USDA, Department of Interior, and Health and Human Services, they announced that the CDC, USDA, Department of Interior, and HHS, they announced that Lyme disease is now one of the top 8 diseases on the prioritizing zoonotic diseases collaboration for One Health. And so do you think that will help for advocating for more money in the budget?
Eventually. Jill and I do speak to the head of the vector-borne division of the CDC on a fairly regular basis. We've talked to him only once this year. There are indications that not in the next 12 months, but further out, which is just way too long, frankly, that there will be a significant increase. Recognize that Lyme specifically, not just all tick-borne diseases, was in the top 6 for a decade now.
I know that the five.
I'm going to be on a call this coming week, and there is going to be a report out by the end of June, an announcement from the CDC, 5 federal agencies, about collaboration on vector-borne diseases. So really looking forward to hearing about that, and I'm hoping it's going to mean there's increased funding. And I do think that the Health and Human Services Tick-Borne Disease Working Group really has heightened the awareness to Congress, because it's Congress that decides on funding. And then, of course, the individual agencies, to some degree, decide where that funding is going. So I hope that's going to really mean something.
Jill showed you a chart that showed where the CDC budget proposal for 2020, which starts October 1st, is actually 10% lower, or 12% lower than it was this year. Now, vector-borne diseases was not lowered at all, which means it went somewhere else. Okay, I mean, overall, CDC's budget was lowered by a couple $100 million. It's in the billions of dollars. It's not small money. But in fact, we were put on the back burner again.
Could you kind of just summarize, I'm not sure I understand the explanation of what the vaccine for all the different mammals does.
The anti-tick vaccine that Jill referred to, which Dr. Thigumani worked a little bit on it for a while with Dr. Weichel, would have prevented the ticks from staying attached. If they can't stay attached, they can't feed. If they can't feed, they can't transmit disease. It's pretty simple as that. It's not that simple, obviously. If it was, we'd have had a solution a long time ago. But that's the general process.
There is a bait vaccine that should become available. That is a vaccine for the reservoirs in nature, the mice, that would vaccinate them against Lyme disease. And I believe after that, they're including, their plans are to include a tick inhibitor feeder, which would essentially do that. So we really do have to fix nature. because without that, this is just going to continue to go on. And if you don't get nabbed by Lyme disease, such as myself, when I finally, after I had it undiagnosed for over 10 years, and I finally got treated, and I went down to my garden, because I love gardening, and I didn't put DEET on because I was taking antibiotics for Lyme disease. Well, I got nabbed with babesiosis, 104, 105 fevers, was not fun. So there are other pathogens out there. These ticks are cesspools of infection.
Can I just ask, like, if the tick can't hatch, or, like, how long, if it's so the tick can't feed to get its blood meal, then how long can a tick in any stage live without a blood meal? Can they live for years, or?
They can live for a long time, but their lifespan is basically 2 years. And yeah, and so it's basically a 2-year cycle altogether. And for each stage, they go from egg. The mother tick lays 2,000 to 3,000 eggs. When they hatch, they're little teeny larvae on the ground, and they're very condensed in an area because they can't move very far. We have our mice, our chipmunks, and everything that come and pick them up. And if those animals are infected, the ticks get infected. If that tick doesn't get a blood meal, it can live for quite a while trying to get one, but eventually it'll die. Same thing in the next stage. So it then molts into a nymphal tick. And that nymphal tick may be infected or may not, but it's going to have another blood meal to continue its life cycle. So, you know, with each stage, that's the same thing. And we've actually had an overwintering. So the adults become active and are seeking, they're questing for a meal starting in about the end of October. And their favorite host is the deer. They feed on the deer, they mate on the deer, and then fall off into the brush where they lay their eggs again. We've had a lot of overwintering, and people are still seeing adult ticks right now, but eventually they would die. I hope that answers it.
Are there any natural predators for ticks?
There are some natural predators for ticks, but I don't think we'd like red ants. And there's also, I'm just trying to think, the wolf spider. Dr. Thingamani, do you know of some others? Fire ants are the primary, yeah. Yeah, and there may be others, you know, that we don't know about. Oh yes, yes. There's a microscopic wasp, and they were actually working on trying to see if that would be effective in reducing tick populations. But as they reduced the tick populations, the wasps couldn't survive. So it was, you know, it never.
And the fungus is being used by Dr. Osfeld. He explained to us last year that he had a problem getting it. Anybody want to guess why? No. Pot growers. Pot growers are buying it up because it protected their crop. The legal ones. I'm not talking about the illegal ones. So, you know, everything's, plus it's it may be very expensive. You had a question over here. They're not natural predators. What they do is they do a good job of cleaning. Jill showed you a picture of the moose. Okay, moose don't groom themselves. As a result, moose populations are being completely annihilated by ticks, physically killed by ticks feeding on them. Deer don't have that problem. Other animals take care of themselves, groom themselves, and they get the ticks off, but they're not predators. They don't go out looking for them to eat.
So there's some animals that are pluses in the environment and some that are minuses, and we consider the possum a plus because if it gets the tick that's on it, they're going to clear the ticks. And it may be why cats don't get infected as often as dogs because they're always cleaning themselves. So there are lots of reasons, but what we have right now is kind of a perfect storm in the environment. We used to have farmlands all over, and now that has been cleared, and we have big ag. So all the environment is brushy and shrubby, and we have more deer. We have people moving into areas where everybody wants to live in the woods and have the beauty of the woods. So.
Do you find those tick tubes to be effective? And since they are expensive to buy, is it as simple as using a tube and filling it with permanent cotton, soap cotton?
Permethrin. So I just read an article, and you'll read one piece of research and then you read another one that negates it. But the latest thing that I read was that the tick tubes are, they knock down about 60%, but you still have 40% in your yard, if that's true. And it was a comparison to that and the TCS, the bait box, where the mice and the chipmunks, and the reason that they surmised that there was the difference is because the chipmunks were the second most highest reservoir in infection. And I know in our yard, we have chipmunks all over the place. Well, the chipmunks don't use the nesting materials, but the TCS box is a little box where there's a bait inside, and there's a wick on top that they have to run through. On top of that wick is fipronil, so it's soaked in fipronil. And these animals go in with ticks on them, they get laced by the fipronil, killing the ticks on them, and that fipronil lasts for about 42 days. So they found that that was much more effective. The problem is that these boxes cost about $1,000 an acre. So we have to find things that are less expensive. And there's one exciting thing on the horizon that I hope will come to fruition, and it's something called Nucatone. And the CDC had a patent for about 17 years. The researcher, Mark Dolan, I spoke with him, and he said that what he did, so what Nucatone is in food and fragrances for us, it's 100% safe for humans. It kills ticks, it kills mosquitoes, and it doesn't kill honeybees. So yeah, so what Mark did in his research, one of the things that he did was he took infected ticks and put them on uninfected mice and allowed them to feed for a while. And then he washed the mice with a solution, a soap solution with Nucatone in it. And 100% of the ticks dropped off, 85% of them died. And if you look online, there's a video of Mark with his fingers, and one finger has Nucatone halfway up. And the ticks crawl up that line and just fall off, whereas the other finger, they keep on crawling. So it's very effective, it's very safe, and just imagine if they made a soap and a shampoo for us. They tell us to do tick checks. Well, you have to be able to see the tick to be able to do a tick check. And the stage of the tick that seems to cause the most problems is the nymphal stage, because that's when we're out of doors. It's most active in the end of May, June, and into July. And it's only the size of a poppy seed. Now, and they like warm, moist places. So, your private parts are warm and moist. Are you going to be really seeing them and finding them if you do a tick check? So imagine if you could just take a bath or a shower at night, parents could bathe their children, and you'd go to bed safe, all the ticks would be off of you, and maybe you'd have another exposure the next day, but you're going to take a bath or a shower at night. The problem is the company that has the licensure for that has to raise, right now they need $700,000 to bring that to fruition. And that's a huge problem. Funding's a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. Get them back on schedule here.